Greetings, everyone. I am introducing the very first podcast series on diaspora potential and diaspora power. Indeed, we are using this opportunity to look at diaspora impacts on the developments in the world and specifically within Trinidad and Tobago. And indeed, the topics that I'm starting on with relate to homeland visits or diaspora tourism, in which it is rarely identified for the purposes of tourism niche markets. I am Dr. Andre Phillips. I'm the Diaspora Engagement Specialist based in Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore several of my references will, of course, come out of my studies on Trinidad and Tobago diaspora journey. It is important to just go back and give a proper focus on the diaspora and the definition of the diaspora. We know that persons who migrate to other countries are considered immigrants, and in this case, Trinidad and Tobago has had that experience like every other country of the world. But the genesis of the diaspora experience dates back to centuries when people, for various reasons, moved from their place of birth or their homeland to live in other places. And this has been driven by factors such as war, famine, and, of course, the economic state of their homelands at the point in time, moving away to seek a better livelihood. As is witnessed today, the Ukraine has a new wave of migrants as people leave that country to find a new life after the invasion of the Ukraine by the Russian forces. It is not the first time Ukrainian migrants are being uprooted because of war-torn conditions in their country. But this new wave, when one looks back 5 years from now, we would be able to see that there are people who have settled in different parts of the world and are trying to make a livelihood in a new territory, which we would refer to as the host country, wherein that scenario has been evident because of war-torn factors more than anything else in the Ukraine. Trinidad and Tobago continues to see every year people leaving its shores to seek a better life elsewhere. And the most significant places of interest for our outward bound population remains the United States, followed by Canada and the UK. In the case of the USA, we are referring to over 60% of all migrants living outside, residing in that territory, and significantly less, maybe about 18 to 20% in the UK, and about 18 to 20% also in Canada. In fact, when Trinidad and Tobago closed its borders during the period of COVID, it was noted that the authorities indicated over 300,000 documented nationals resided abroad. And this is a situation that confirms or validates the documentation that talks about the immigration numbers for Trinidad and Tobago. As we proceed during this podcast series, we will look at diaspora engagement in relation to business enterprise, diaspora engagement in relation to philanthropy, especially in the area of healthcare and wellness, and diaspora engagement in the area of sports, as well as diaspora engagement in what we typically know as our cultural art form. But today and next week, our focus is on what we would coin as diaspora tourism, a look at homeland visits and its impact on Trinidad and Tobago. Now, it is important to understand that Trinidad and Tobago has had a very significant and steady rate of return visits by migrants and their children and grandchildren to Trinidad and Tobago. And the key months are February, August, and December. But what is clear is there is a intention to visit by people who reside abroad, especially in North America, because of their need for reconnection with home, family members at home, and friends. Also, another factor is rejuvenation, the need to really get back into a country where, and surveys show, they feel that their own ethnic group is in the majority as against the scenario in the host countries that they have opted to move to. So they feel a sense of the Trinbago vibe that is not evident when they are in the foreign jurisdiction where they reside. And of course, there is rediscovery. A notion of rediscovery is also prompting return visits. So you refer to people coming to do their leisure trips and have a focus on visiting attractions which are natural and historical attractions, most of which are popular now, but probably would not have been identified as key attractions when some of the migrants resided in the homeland. So those are the dominant factors that produce these rapid and frequent continuous visits throughout the year. It's important also to understand that history and literature supports the diaspora as really considered as persons who are abroad, continue to have an interest in their country, a birth or place. That is why we can talk about the different categories of support, because there is evidence that diaspora people have contributed back to the homeland of Trinidad across a range of categories and are expected to continue doing so. And this is actually seen when the diaspora work is analyzed. We have really evidence of a brain gain where previously many associated in migration with the brain drain. Now, it's also important to understand that in the year 2021, when Trinidad and Tobago eventually opened up its borders again, we were able to open the borders for the traffic of persons holding TNT passports. They were allowed to come and go based on the strict visitor protocol that was introduced during the period of COVID. And in the 7-month period, 2021, it appears as though Trinidad and Tobago had received over 40,000 visitors. And the majority of these visitors, the vast majority, came from the USA. But a study done in 2019, an analytics related to tourism statistics of that year, would have shown that Trinidad and Tobago grossed close to 400,000 visitor arrivals, and 178,000 of these arrivals were from the U.S. But it is also important to note that when one extrapolates from visiting friends and relatives, which is the mechanism used to trap the diaspora visits to home, it is revealing that 50% of all visitors registered as visitors arriving in Trinidad and Tobago are really people who are connected to Trinidad and Tobago. They are the diaspora. They remain the largest source market for Trinidad and Tobago. So I would continue in the next podcast treated with the homeland visits, diaspora tourism, and share some more impacts associated with this class of tourists coming back home. This has been Diaspora Potential, Diaspora Power and Potential, brought to you by Trinbago Diaspora Outreach Network And I'm your host, Dr. Andre Phillips.